When Datuk Seri Najib Tun Razak became Prime Minister of Malaysia on April 3, 2009, the global economy was still reeling from the 2008 financial crisis. Around the world, countries were grappling with slowing growth, rising unemployment, and damaged consumer confidence. Malaysia, being an export-oriented economy, felt these effects too. By 2009, the country's GDP contracted by about 1.5%, according to the Department of Statistics Malaysia, reflecting a sudden dip in external demand for electronics, palm oil, and other key exports. Najib stepped into office with a vision to transform Malaysia into a high-income, globally competitive nation. He introduced various policy frameworks, such as the Economic Transformation Programme, ETP, in 2010, aimed at raising Malaysia's gross national income and attracting more foreign investment. His administration also launched government and political reforms under different transformation roadmaps. While these programs had ambitious targets, such as achieving developed nation status, they were also accompanied by controversies, especially regarding public debt, rising living costs, and governance issues highlighted by the 1MDB scandal. Despite these challenges, Malaysia's economy, under Najib, actually continued to post strong economic growth. And that's what we are going to discuss today. What were Najib Razak's economic policies, and just how did it help push Malaysia's economy? To understand this, let's start with the economic indicator that occurred under his tenure, and then talk about what were the specific economic policies he implemented. Let's start with the most famous economic indicator often used, Gross Domestic Product, GDP. Here's a graph of the annual GDP growth of Malaysia from 2000 to 2023. Here, you can see just how well Malaysia's economy performed under Najib. But what were the years that Najib governed? Well, it was from 2009 to 2018. As you can see, from this period, Malaysia's economy was fairly stable, except for 2009, as the global economy was reeling from a recession at that time. But was Malaysia's economy doing better under his tenure, or was it better for the previous prime ministers? Well, let's see. From 2009 to 2018, Malaysia's economy grew at an average rate of 4.76%. But without the 2009 year, it's at 5.45%. So, was this good or bad? Let's compare. The previous Prime Minister that preceded Najib Razak was Abdullah Ahmad Badawi, who served from 2003 to 2009. The average economic growth rate from 2003 to 2009 was 4.73%, which was, in fact, nearly the same as the performance seen under Najib Razak. Examining the prime ministers that succeeded Najib, however, is quite difficult, considering that there were a number of other prime ministers who served in office, but did not serve long enough to actually implement significant long-term economic policies. One of them, however, can be Anwar Ibrahim, who started his tenure in November of 2022. How did current Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim compare to Najib Razak? Well, here's a separate graph on the quarterly GDP growth rate of Malaysia. As we mentioned earlier, Anwar started his tenure at the end of 2022, so we'll use the first quarter of 2023. From the first quarter of 2023 to the latest quarter, available for the third quarter of 2024, Malaysia's average GDP growth stood at 4.24%, which is again nearly the same as Najib Razak, but is of course lower by a small margin compared to Najib's adjusted average of 5.45%, or his complete tenure of 4.76%. Beyond the metric of GDP, there's also the unemployment rate. Unemployment is a critical indicator since it reflects the health of the labour market and the broader economy. Here's a graph on Malaysia's unemployment rate, data that we collected from the World Bank. Here you can see, from 2009 to 2018, the unemployment rate was relatively stable. The average from this period stands at 3.25%, which is much better than the one seen in the previous Prime Minister of Abdullah Ahmad Badawi, which had an average unemployment rate during his tenure of 3.46%. The unemployment rate of Anwar Ibrahim, however, may not be as favourable given the lingering economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and global uncertainties. Moreover, there's still a lot more time for him to do more than just his first few years in office, so we'll leave it out for now. Another economic indicator that we want to talk about is inflation. Inflation isn't a favourable concept for many Malaysians. Well, not like it's a favourable concept for anyone at all. But let's see just how well inflation has occurred under Najib. Here you can see, just like the previous graphs that we showed, inflation was, again, stable. Of course, there were years when the inflation rate rose surprisingly fast, such as in 2017. But on average, the inflation rate from 2009 to 2018 was about 2.12%. The previous Prime Minister, on the other hand, saw an average inflation rate of 2.45%, which was slightly higher. Here's another graph to show just how well the inflation rate has been under Anwar Ibrahim. As we mentioned earlier, however, Anwar Ibrahim's economic performance is still incomplete, especially given the fact that he has faced several key challenges that have significantly influenced Malaysia's inflation dynamics. But you can already see the effects of Malaysia's inflation rate under Anwar. In the month of November 2022, when Anwar became Prime Minister, Malaysia's inflation rate was 4.2%, which was a very high rate. But as of the latest months available, Malaysia's inflation rate has gradually declined, reflecting efforts by Anwar's administration to stabilise the economy and curb price increases. Therefore, comparatively, both administrations have done very well in managing inflation, albeit under vastly different circumstances. The last economic indicator that we want to talk about is foreign direct investments, FDI. Here, as you can see in the graph, FDI has been profoundly much better from 2009 to 2018 than the ones seen in previous years. This is a good reflection of the economic environment of Malaysia under Najib Razak. So, now let's talk about the economic policies implemented under Najib Razak. The most important economic policy under Najib was arguably no other than the Goods and Services Tax, GST. It has been the most significant and even one of the most controversial ones out there. But why was it so significant and controversial? Well, the Goods and Service Tax was implemented in April of 2015, which was about midway through Najib's administration. The goal was to address Malaysia's fiscal challenges by diversifying the government's revenue streams. What that simply meant was that the government wanted to reduce its reliance on volatile income sources, particularly revenue from petroleum exports, which had historically been a significant contributor to the national budget. By introducing the GST, Najib's administration aimed to create a more stable and predictable revenue base that could support the country's development goals, even during periods of economic uncertainty. Here's a graph with data that we collected from the Ministry of Finance of Malaysia on the revenue source of Malaysia from 2009 to 2017. Here you can see that from 2009 to 2014, oil-related revenues were starting to decline in providing revenues to Malaysia's government. Najib Razak needed to fix this, because as Malaysia continues to grow economically, it cannot continue to rely on oil revenues, because such dependence makes the economy vulnerable to external shocks, such as fluctuations in global oil prices. This was particularly evident during the global oil price crash of 2014, which significantly reduced Malaysia's oil revenue. You can see just how well GST helped increase Malaysia's revenue sources. In 2014, SST had only provided 7.8% to the total revenues of Malaysia. But by 2015, the year of its implementation, it rose to over 16.1% and increased in later years. Here's another graph on Malaysia's revenue for taxes on goods and services in the national currency, data from the OECD. Here, you can also see a big increase in revenues for Malaysia. In 2014, it stood at only 40 billion ringgit, but by 2015, it rose immediately to over 56 billion ringgit, and further increases were seen in later years. The only problem with GST, however, is that many Malaysians, especially those who belong to low-income households, have blamed the GST for exacerbating living cost pressures. Despite helping Malaysia's fiscal stance at that time, it was repelled by political opponents who came to power in 2018 and repelled it in the very same year. The second big economic policy under Najib Razak is related to fuel subsidies. Malaysia had long been known for its subsidized fuel, which was popular among citizens, but was a significant strain on the government budget. Here's a graph on the subsidies, incentives, and assistance in billions of ringgit of Malaysia, data from the Ministry of Finance Malaysia. Here, you can see that while subsidies continued to climb from 2009 to 2014, it has gradually come down and became stable. This was because of the reforms made in fuel subsidies. But of course, the move led to a market-driven fuel price, which did nothing but pushed prices higher at the pump, sparking debates about the actual burden on lower-income Malaysians and the need for targeted subsidies. To offset the impact of subsidy cuts and GST on lower-income groups, Najib introduced Bantuan Rakyat One Malaysia, a direct cash aid program. The amounts varied year to year, but hovered around 500 to 1,200 ringgit for eligible households. These, then, were the reasons behind the increase or continuous subsidies and assistance that the government had to give out every year. But what were the fuel prices like? Let's take a look at this graph on Malaysia's diesel prices. You can see how diesel prices fluctuated over time, affected by global oil price changes and domestic policies. After Najib Razak ended his tenure in 2018, the Mahathir Mohamad administration took a different approach. Mahathir's government introduced a more controlled system, fixing the price of diesel and other fuel products. This was a major shift from Najib's policy. Under Najib, a managed float system was introduced in 2014. This system allowed fuel prices, including diesel, to adjust every month based on global oil prices and the ringgit's exchange rate. The idea was to reduce the government's spending on subsidies and make fuel prices more in line with international markets. While this helped ease Malaysia's fiscal challenges, it wasn't popular with the public because the frequent price changes affected their cost of living. Mahathir, on the other hand, decided to cap fuel prices. Diesel was set at 2 ringgit 18 sen per litre, protecting consumers from sudden price spikes in the global market. Along with this price ceiling, his government introduced the Petrol Subsidy Programme, PSP, to provide direct financial aid to lower-income households. This was different from the older blanket subsidies, as it focused only on those who needed help the most, making the system fairer. Mahathir's approach aimed to give Malaysians some relief from unpredictable fuel costs while addressing concerns about affordability, especially for lower-income families. These two policies were amongst the most critical parts of Najib Razak's administration. But, as many know, despite the data indicating relatively strong growth and structural reforms, Najib's economic legacy is inseparable from the One Malaysia Development Berhad 1 MDB scandal. 1 MDB was a government-owned investment fund established in 2009 to drive strategic investments. Yet, due to the problems it has brought, it may have overshadowed much of the economic progress achieved during Najib's tenure. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.